Has your sort of opinion changed from the start of, right, we're going to jump into a UFO, UFO documentary from previously doing things that are totally unrelated to now doing two of these shows and having spoken to so many people? Where do you sit on this at the moment?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? And that's what everybody asks me. What makes the best documentary film and TV is when the filmmakers are able to approach it with an open mind and a desire to tell the best, truest story, not the story that they think needs to be kind of advanced. And so we did that in with that first series UFO, and we had this. Both of these series are produced by J.J. Abrams' company, Bad Robot, and so we really wanted to bring the Bad Robot level of quality to the series. I don't really think had been treated alongside UFOs in a mainstream documentary previously, and so that was what we were sort of trying to do, was basically be like, pose the question to viewers who wouldn't have encountered it already of, what if these aren't machines in the sky? What if they are something weirder, more unique, that really bears like on what it means to be a human being?
The following is a conversation with Kevin Lincoln. Kevin is someone who brings a sharp eye and a deep curiosity to the strange corners of our world. Kevin's a documentary filmmaker, a producer, and a journalist and writer whose work dives into the unseen, the unexplained, and the deeply human. He's written for the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, GQ, The Wall Street Journal. He's executive produced Beyond UFOs and the Unknown, a 4-part episode documentary series for MGM, and UFO, a 4-part episode documentary series for Showtime, both from and working with J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot. Kevin has worked with Oscar-winning producers, has shows on Netflix, Showtime, Discovery, MGM. His most recent show, Beyond UFOs and the Unknown, produced alongside J.J. Abrams, is what brought Kevin and I together. I actually appeared in the show, and Kevin was co-producer and sat behind the camera asking me questions. He's a very talented interviewer. And since then, I've really wanted to ask him some questions on UFOs, belief, and what the phenomena tells us about ourselves. Kevin is a really humble guy, but hugely talented. And we get into it all: filmmaking, UFOs, and what could be out there. So, the following is a conversation with Kevin Lincoln. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate your time. And it's good to see you again. I wonder if it's possible just to kind of jump into the filmmaking stuff and how you got into filmmaking, and perhaps we can move on to some of the UFO stuff in a bit. But weren't you like an editor and a writer in news publications prior to documentary stuff?
That's right. Yeah, my background is in journalism. I worked for online publications and then magazines, and so before doing docs, that was kind of how I learned to report, do interviews, tell a story. Um, and then I kind of had as many people who you talk to end up in this line of work do. I had sort of a roundabout journey to film and TV. I got a job writing for a late night sports TV show, actually. And that brought me to Los Angeles. And then I kind of just kept jumping from, opportunity to opportunity and ended up doing docs. So yeah, it's been great, and I love making these, and it does have a lot in common with magazine journalism in particular, because what you need to do is you need to figure out the best way to tell a long, complicated, in-depth story while keeping the viewer or reader's attention.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not sort of by nature a UFO filmmaker, are you? You've done all sorts of different subjects, different genres. How did it come to UFOs? I mean, this is like we're talking about the sort of Beyond show, but you did one prior to that, didn't you? In, I want to say 2021, 2020, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. Well, basically, like so many stories in the space, I think, of people's interactions with it. It starts in 2017 with the New York Times front page story about UFOs. The That story, I think, generated a lot of curiosity among people who hadn't previously taken the subject seriously. I think we all know this. We're all very well acquainted with that. Some of the producers I work with had the idea of, oh, we should make a UFO documentary series, but we should do it in a way that is very much like we're outsiders coming into this world and approaching it with a very journalistic, critical, serious lens. So we're going to, you know, we're not going to we're not believers, but we're not skeptics either. And I think up until, we weren't the only ones who did this, but I think we were some of the first serious filmmakers to come in and really treat the subject not like we had, some cause to advance or like we had to debunk it. And I think that really opened the door for us to get really deep into the story and investigate a lot of the weird sort of, offshoots that it can produce. Um, Without ever feeling like we had like an axe to grind, which is really helpful. And I think is generally what makes the best documentary film and TV is when the filmmakers are able to approach it with an open mind and a desire to tell the best, truest story, not the story that they think needs to be kind of advanced. And so we did that in with that first series UFO, and we had this. Both of these series are produced by J.J. Abrams' company, Bad Robot, and so we really wanted to bring the Bad Robot level of quality to the series, and so I think that's why both series of high quality recreations. They have the interviews are really stylized and kind of like we approach them with a certain look in mind, and we really wanted it to feel like it had these sort of sci-fi elements. So you were getting like the best of watching a documentary and sort of like a really gripping sci-fi series.
Yeah, yeah, definitely had that feel to it, definitely. I mean I love that. We get lots of I hear lots of people say, well, it's just why are they making entertainment? This is a really serious subject and it should be taken really seriously. I'm like, and I'm, from my perspective, and I'll ask you for yours in a second, but from my perspective, it has to have that engaging feel to it, that sort of exciting feel to it, to sort of bring people in and keep people along for the ride, I think. And it's trying to get that balance between really, really good data, information, really interesting people and stories and all that sort of stuff, as well as having it just this really beautiful thing to watch and to keep you along for the ride. That's how I felt anyway when I saw it, and when I see certain things that just kind of make that happen, those two things coming together, I think it's so important. I don't know what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I mean, I don't think that quality, informational quality and cinematic quality are mutually exclusive. In fact, I think they generally go together. I think most of the greatest documentaries ever made, The Thin Blue Line, Errol Morris's film comes to mind, tend to be very formally and visually innovative as well, because this is the medium you're working in. You're making a film or a television show. You are working in a cinematic medium. You could write a blog post or a magazine story or a newspaper article, or you could do a podcast, or you could do these are all opportunities to tell these stories in different mediums. And I think if you're going to make a film or a film or a television series, it serves you to make it as good as it can be and as entertaining and as gripping and compelling without sacrificing, you know, factual, facticity, intellectual depth, all of that. And I think beyond, like we interviewed Jeff Kripal, Mitch Horowitz, Jacques Vallée, Hal Puthoff, Gary Nolan. Like these are all, heavy hitters, very serious thinkers, very smart people talking about subjects that are very dense and often kind of hard to understand. And so, you know, I certainly don't think the right approach, and this is again my opinion as a filmmaker and as part of the team that made this, is my opinion is not that you want to make that sort of thing feel dry and serious and like we're all, you're in a college lecture hall. You want it to feel like it's bringing you in and inviting you to sort of be open to ideas that you might not otherwise be open to. I mean, if somebody, and again, this is, I think, also part of trying to talk to a broad audience versus trying to just talk to like believers or skeptics, people, what they already think. I mean, if you want people to take you seriously when you start talking about multiple dimensions and craft from the future and consciousness and all and near death experiences and all of these things that we worked into beyond, you really need to be meeting them where they're at and helping them understand the context of that. You can't just be like, you know, giving them a lecture because they're going to tune out and they're just going to like, I'm not that interested in this. But I think there's also, that being said, it is really important that it is serious and you're taking it seriously and then it's not just like schlocky entertainment too. So I think there's always balance. But I mean, again, talking about like movies, I mean, I think you look at somebody like filmmakers like Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese, or I mean, the list goes on. In American film, Robert Altman, any number of these are really really intelligent, sophisticated filmmakers who are making really really exciting, compelling, and entertaining movies. I mean, like you know, Christopher Nolan can make a movie about J. Robert Oppenheimer, a nuclear scientist, that makes $1 billion worldwide. Then, what excuse do you have not to try and make a really serious subject entertaining?
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Very good point. So what was it that so you did the UFO 2020 2021 roughly. What was it that made you get back into it? Was it always the intention of having right, we'll do this first one and then a few years later we'll look at a sort of a second version or second part or catch up with what was the thought process there?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we were always open to the idea that we would revisit it. I think that ultimately, if you watch those two series side by side, um, what you see is that UFO is much more about, it's centered on the subject of UFOs, and particularly at that point in time when we kind of didn't know what was coming from the government, if anything. We didn't know, whether we'd be hearing about disclosure, what was going to happen. And I think a few years later, what I at least felt had taken place, and I think a lot of people have a lot of different opinions on the subject. I had kind of thought, all right, this story's still out there, but it feels pretty clear like it's not going to resolve itself anytime soon. Like the United States government is not going to come out and be like, you know what? We actually have an alien, trapped underground in Nevada. We just haven't been telling you guys. But yeah, we've got an alien, we've got these craft, and they do all sorts of crazy stuff. We just been waiting to tell you. But now we're going to tell you. We're going to disclose all this information. I don't really think that's how the government tends to operate. And I'm very open. I could be proven wrong at any moment. Who knows? Who knows what'll happen? But I sort of thought, okay, I think that this story is going to continue to be quite strange and interesting, and it's going to take different routes, as it sort of expands. And so, how can we tell the full breadth of this story, you know, and really do it justice and investigate sort of like, oh, what is actually happening here? And so that's what kind of led to the idea of Beyond, which it's about UFOs, but it's also about consciousness, I think largely as a phenomenon that intersects with the UFO UAP phenomenon. And so, that was why it was so crucial to talk to people like Jeff Kripal, go to Rice University, go to the Archives of the Impossible, go to the Archives of the Impossible conference, and be immersed in sort of the intersectionality of all of those fields. And we covered near death experiences, Dr. Eben Alexander, and we brought in a lot of concepts that I think people had. I don't really think had been treated alongside UFOs in a mainstream documentary previously. And so that was what we were sort of trying to do, was basically be like, pose the question to viewers who wouldn't have encountered it already of, what if these aren't machines in the sky? What if they are something weirder, more unique, that really bears like on what it means to be a human being? And that's kind of what one of our directors, Mark Monroe, would sort of keep coming back to, was like, what does this say about us as like human beings? What does it say about our consciousness and the way it works and what it means to be, alive? Like, does this have something to do with that? And I think that was really the driving question beyond, in a way that I think UFO, we were aware of it, but it just was too early, I think, in the mainstreaming of UFOs as a serious subject to start getting into kind of those like weirder corridors of it.
Yeah, yeah. You obviously you took part in the interviewing, the literally interviewing people, and as well as producing and doing all the other bits and pieces that you obviously that goes into making a documentary. But very specifically, you're asking questions, and it's something that I've obviously experienced, asking the questions and sitting there opposite somebody and speaking to lots of different people, and I wonder if you're, because you've spoken to, I'm assuming, quite a few people at this point in this subject, and has your sort of opinion changed from the start of, right, we're going to jump into a UFO UFO documentary, from previously doing things that are totally unrelated to now doing two of these shows and having spoken to so many people? Where do you sit on this at the moment?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? And that's what everybody asks me, especially people who aren't in the UFO world. They're like, so what do you think? Are they real? And my answer is always, I feel like to those people, it's always really disappointing because it's always like, well, I don't think that they're really craft from, Alpha Centauri, but I do think something's going on. I think it probably has to do with consciousness and, like multidimensionality and also going back to, fairies and the long running lore of other, and people, I feel like, to just start to be like, okay, I wish I hadn't asked this question. I think personally, I would say I tend to take a kind of a Jungian approach to it, which I would say is basically, I think that there's something happening that people are experiencing. Um, I think it's not just a purely psychological phenomenon. I think it does have an existence of its own and an intelligence of some sort, but I don't think it is discreetly limited to this type of phenomenon, UFOs or like the orbs. I know you often, deal with these kind of orbs of light, like these things that we think of as like the UAPs. I think there's some sort of thread tying them back to other very culturally specific and dependent uh, phenomena that we've basically had as long as we've been human beings. I mean, supernatural encounters with supernatural phenomena and supernatural um, phenomena being a part of different cultures' folkloric traditions is pretty much universal. And so I would say that UFOs to me seem to be a culturally specific expression of that force for the time we live in, which is very technological. It's very focused around machines, vehicles, craft, particularly post World War II, post Trinity explosion. There's something very fitting about the fact that we keep encountering these craft. So that's what, that's kind of my thought. Like, I don't know though, I don't really know what to make of David Grush saying, "Oh yeah, there are these, huge craft that we have." I don't know what to make of various other people asserting that, asserting more sort of concrete, ideas about it. I don't I'm not saying by any means that I would like dismiss them, but I also it strikes me as more difficult to buy into that very literal explanation, just because we haven't seen any real concrete evidence of that. And even though we've sort of been orbiting this idea of craft, aliens, reverse engineered technology, all this stuff for 75 years, essentially since the middle of the 20th century, I don't know that we, you really, there still isn't a smoking gun that's like, oh yeah, that's it. That's the thing. But then again, like I said, I would say one way that my attitude has changed, or at least evolved, is that I'm very, very reluctant to ever say that I have like I know anything. Like I am very aware, like I very much know what I don't know. And what I don't know is like most things, even though I've spent so much time working on the subject. And I think you just, you've probably experienced this too. The more time you spend in the UFO UAP space, the more you start to just, I think, be kind of open minded and, aware that there's just a lot of things happening out there that we don't really understand.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. It's that sort of the more you look into it, the less you feel you know. It's just, and I'm the same. I'm like, you go down a new rabbit hole. It's like, well, this is a whole new thing. And what I was learning over there, I thought I was getting close, but now I'm further away. I'm over here.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think people like you and me, we have the luxury of we don't have to have an opinion, which is great,
yeah,
because I think there are people who their existence in this space is really dependent on them having their position or their opinion or their cause they're advocating for or their scientific explanation of what's going on. And I've always gravitated toward the thinkers like, again, Jeff Kripal, Jacques Vallée, who are just like, we've got ideas, but I can't tell you, what's happening. I mean, I think Jeff Kripal very much is kind of like, I have thoughts about what's going on here, but I have no explanation for you of what these things are. And that's very much how I feel. And it's nice to be able to feel that way.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can I ask what's your process when you're looking at when you're sitting behind the camera and you're looking at asking those questions and trying to get you're stitching together a sort of storyline, I guess, for your sort of documentary films. Do you have you got a process that you sort of follow when you're looking at sort of questions to ask or how to ask the questions? I'm keen to know any insights really, especially because this is kind of my area where I'm always looking to learn.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say that there's very much a process. Uh, it basically is okay. So you start off and you have ideas about what you want to cover on a subject. You start to find the people who you could interview. You start reaching out, you start making contact, you start queuing up these interviews. And the more of them that you do, the more you start to see kind of like hidden threads emerge that join them together. And I think what you start to do the deeper into the process you get is you start to try and tie those threads up, right? You start to connect one person to another person to another person so that you can tell a story that encompasses all of them, but is then also like about something bigger. So when I go in to interview somebody like you, for example, I'm interviewing you about your story and I'm interviewing you about your work, but I'm also very much keeping in mind, okay, like how does Jimmy's work feed into some of the other folks' work we've talked to? And how does it feed into kind of the themes we're starting to explore that are starting to become really like important and commanding our attention? And so I'll try to basically do both of those things in an interview. I'll try to, really meet the person where they're at and talk to them about them, just kind of, independently of what we're doing. And then I will also really try to ask them questions with an eye toward how it fits into the larger structure that we're creating. Um, and then I think obviously that's the production process of a documentary. Then documentaries are very, very, very heavily made in the editing process. So you end up doing the shooting and the editing kind of simultaneously most of the time, not like totally simultaneously, but you'll start to assemble rough versions of what you're doing. And then you'll understand, oh, you know what? We really need to talk to this type of person, you know? Like, for example, part of why we wanted to talk to you was because we were like, we really need to talk to somebody who is like seeing and engaging with sightings and videos and media all the time because they're going to be able to speak to what this is looking like kind of on the ground. It's like the digital ground, but it's basically like you've really got your finger in the sort of like the flow of how this is being observed. So that again becomes like, okay, we're talking to you about your work, but you're going to serve that purpose in the project, and so we're going to really approach you with questions like that in mind. And then there's some people, you find out you're going to interview Jacques Vallée, and you're just like, okay, we're going to just ask Jacques Vallée about Jacques Vallée and about his work. And obviously we have ways that we, know, okay, we've talked to Gary Nolan, we'll want him to talk about that. But like some people, you really are just like, oh my God, it's like such a privilege to get this person and to feature them in the project. And we really just want to like showcase them to some extent. So there will be some subjects who end up, you approach a little bit more as just like, this is a great opportunity to tell your story because you're somebody who's so well known and hasn't done that many of these things. And like, we just want you to be able to put your be able to show who you are. I think most of the time though, you're kind of approaching it like, okay, you're somebody who does really important work on your own and you're fitting into our project in this way. And I think as long as you can kind of keep those two things in mind, you end up being able to do justice to your interviews while still making something that feels like coherent, and like it's like a larger story rather than just a series of different interviews, which can become the danger with this kind of work is that your project becomes kind of vignette-y. It's like, okay, it's about UFOs, and this part's about this person's work on UFOs, and then this person's part's about this part, and you just kind of go through a bunch of different ideas, and at the end you're like, and that was a bunch of people who do work on UFOs, and then but you can't necessarily like deliver that larger conclusion. So yeah, I would say that's kind of like a broad overview. If you have other more specific questions too, I'm happy to answer them.
That's really interesting. I mean, I find it fascinating. I love the idea of, the whole filmmaking process and learning about it and seeing it and watching different things come to life and how people do it and go, okay, I see what they did there. And I like that. And I like, I think, there's a lot of people out there who are probably in a similar position to me where they're, very, 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 just in the door in sort of content creation and starting to think, right, I'd like to do something like this in the future and I'd like to do something like that. And how do you do that? And I think, I guess that's the next question really is if you're new into this subject and not necessarily UFOs, but into telling a story and and sort of putting people on in front of the camera, trying to tell a story, what's the sort of route in, I guess? What would be the best? How would you advise somebody to start? If somebody saw you and said, look, I want to get into documentary filmmaking, where do I start? Where do I start?
That's a great question. And I mean, there's never been a better time to try and become a nonfiction film maker, content creator, whatever you want to call it, you know, which is kind of paradoxical because there's probably never been a worse time to be an independent, well, not never. It's a very difficult time to be an independent documentary filmmaker because the market it's just changed a lot. There used to be a lot more of an infrastructure for these kinds of like very journalistic, very independently created documentary films. That being said, there's still ways to show them. But if you're somebody starting out, YouTube is just such a tremendous place to be able to showcase your work. And I think that you just have to be realistic. I think that the project we made is funded by a streamer. It was had a budget that I would say is out of the range of most individuals. It involved very very skilled technicians, doing lighting and editing and doing the camera, handling the cameras and all this stuff. And so it's a very professional operation in that everybody who's working on it does this for a living. So if you're somebody who doesn't do it for a living, but you want to start doing it, I would say that you can still work with all of the essential elements of documentary filmmaking, which are, I would say there's probably three or four. One is archival. There's never been an easier time to work with media. There's tons of media out there. There's tons of footage on YouTube. There's tons of things on TikTok and Instagram and all these places that you can take and you can edit it together And if you don't have the rights to it, well, it's not that big of a deal if you're just going to put it on YouTube. It's, you can still showcase your creativity. So there's archival, as like, well, anybody can interview anybody. Nobody is stopping you from sending an email to somebody and saying, hey, like, I'm starting a podcast, I'm starting a video series, I'm trying to make a documentary. Would you want to do a Zoom and I'll record you and we can do an interview? I mean, that is like, you can do that, and Zooms can actually look kind of cool in a documentary if the style is a certain way. Um, there's a great, and I'm gonna reference a few examples of kind of what I'm talking about here. And then there's kind of like so there's archival, there's interviews, and then I would say, a big part of bigger documentaries is recreations, which are harder to do when you don't have much of a budget. But there's like an example is there's a film called Grand Theft Hamlet that just came out that's on Mubi, that was a pair of English filmmakers, and they one of them during the pandemic, he staged a production of Hamlet within the world of Grand Theft Auto Online. And so he like cast it and rehearsed all these actors, but the whole film is 100% set in the world of Grand Theft Auto. So it's just video game footage. And so, that's anybody, I mean, you still need some technical sophistication, but it's nothing you couldn't learn how to do online. And you never need to go out in the world and film anything. So I think that film to me is a really great example of just like how you can do a lot if you're just creative and you think about the different ways that certain mediums can function as, content. And I think especially in the era of like Twitch streamers and esports, I think probably there's a bigger world of video game documentaries out there that you can make. I would also say that, video essays, like narrating your own editing is still can be very effective. I mean, one of the great documentary filmmakers of all time, Adam Curtis, is essentially, he just edits stuff together and talks over it. And it's great. It's so much fun to watch. And so that's very simple. I mean, he's a very, very talented editor and storyteller, but like, he's not, taking a 20-person film crew into the Himalayas. Like, he's not, they're not like in a war zone. It's just editing stuff together and talking over it. And there's another really great example of that, and a little bit more sort of a more recent, is this guy John Boyce. His name is JONBOIS. And his work is, I think, really inspiring to watch, because he works very much from this realm of like narration, clever use of graphics, to tell like really interesting idiosyncratic stories about sports. So I think if you watch any of those, you watch Adam Curtis, John Boyce, Grand Theft Hamlet, you can just see how high, like how much room there is to do something from your computer, without ever needing to buy an expensive camera and go out into the world. You can do that. That is obviously like still available. And then again, you can, your phone takes pretty good video. So like, you might need to get like a shotgun mic to put on it or something, but you can go out and videos and record stuff with your phone, and it can look pretty good. So certainly like you can go out and shoot stuff, but there's definitely an opportunity, especially for people who are just starting out, to just like fiddle around with telling stories in that manner. And I think that you can make some really great stuff.
Superb. Thank you so much for that. That's really appreciated. That's awesome. Okay, I'm just conscious of your time, Kevin. What's next for you? Are you having some time off now? Can I just ask, the Beyond show, is that coming out in the UK soon? I know that there was region America stuff. Do you know if that's going to be UK release?
I'm not actually sure. I can look into it and see if maybe I can get you a date to put in like the show notes or something, but I'm not actually sure off the top of my head when it's coming out in the UK.
Cool. Are you having a break now? Are you working? Are you on another project? What are you doing now?
I'm working. I'm not working on anything that I could talk about quite yet, but the life of a documentary filmmaker is that you're pretty much always working on a million things, and you're waiting to kind of see what's gonna be the thing that gets made. And so I'm I'm in a pretty heavy development period right now, but I've got a lot of projects that I'm excited about, and we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if I end up back in the UFO space or not. It's possible, but again, it's like this has not made me a UFO filmmaker. Most of the projects I'm working on have nothing to do with UFOs, but I really enjoyed working in the space. I really enjoy the material and the ideas in particular. The philosophies and the different scientific explanations for what might be going on. So I'd love to revisit it if the opportunity presented itself, but we'll see. I mean, who knows what the next few years will bring us as far as the UAP story. I have absolutely no idea.
It's anyone's guess, isn't it? It could go anyway. Awesome, Kevin. I really appreciate it. It's good to talk again, and I really appreciate obviously you involving me in the project. That was fantastic and life changing for me, genuinely. So it was incredible, and to see how you work and how the sort of professional, the setup, it was incredible, and yeah, I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you for doing it. You're a great person to have in the series, and we were really happy to talk to you.
Very kind, Kevin. Hopefully, we'll stay in touch, buddy, and talk again in the future.
Love to.
Take care of yourself. Cheers now.
All right. You too. Bye.
Cheers.